Tonight on Free Minds TV, we'll be talking about the compromise deal on tax cuts and the extension of unemployment benefits. Yes, we did call that one. We'll also be talking about a Keene area teacher who will not be losing his job after being convicted on marijuana-related charges. We'll also be talking about street signs, UNICEF, and how it relates to WikiLeaks. That plus a whole lot more coming up tonight on Free Minds TV.
And welcome to episode 185 of Free Minds TV, where we challenge you, the viewer, to think outside the box. As always, it is Toby here with you.
And Nick.
We have a lot to get into.
UNICEF, I meant UNESCO.
UNESCO.
It's a different UN agency. UNICEF is like the trick-or-treat boxes.
Yeah. Anyway,
UNESCO is other stuff.
We'll be getting into that story and what the U.S. is calling for press freedom, Nick. We'll be getting into that and how it's kind of ironic. And
we'll be teaching those savages in the third world how to run an open and free
press and freedom of information. We'll be getting into that. We'll also be getting into an update on a story we first reported on about a teacher here in the local area getting arrested for marijuana, being convicted on it, and well, I guess it looks like he's going to keep his job. We'll be giving you those details. But first, if you were listening to Free Minds Radio this past week, I think it was the 5th of December, Sunday, the live show. At the end of the show, a caller called in asking if we think that unemployment benefits would be extended because they were cut off. And the caller called in asking about that and some tax information and some other stuff. And right before we got off the air, Nick, you made a prediction. And 2 days later, it came true. And so when we make these predictions, we like to pat ourselves on the back, brag a little bit about it. Plus, it's a big story, so it's important to talk about it as well.
Right. I mean, so what has ended up happening, because there were people actually up against the wall, basically, they were at the point where their unemployment benefits were going to run out, or they actually had run out as of December 1st. So, as a way to get an unemployment benefits extension passed, the White House basically threw the Republicans a really big bone, which was continuing, basically granting what amounts to a 2-year extension of the Bush-era tax cuts, the entirety of the Bush-era tax cuts, because both sides said that they wanted to continue tax cuts for people making less than $250,000 in the middle class. But they've extended all areas of the Bush-era tax cuts, and that applies to income tax, capital gains, dividends, things like that. So it's a political compromise, but essentially what you have here is a conservative so-called program that will, these tax cuts, that to some extent are going to expand the deficit. And you also have, well, what is a spending measure that is going to, you know, a liberal spending measure that's going to increase the deficit and ultimately increase the national debt. So you still have politicians keeping tax cuts in place as they spend more money. So we're continuing to see, Toby, a situation where in Washington, they want to pay for a whole bunch of programs, but they don't have the political will to raise taxes to actually pay for them as they go. And neither side is supporting pay-as-you-go. They love the ability to run up deficits, to run up an enormous debt, which now stands, as we're reporting on this right now, at $13.8 trillion. The debt ceiling currently is at $14 trillion. That's going to get blown through by spring.
They'll just bump that up again. So
and we reported on this when we first hit double-digit debt.
Right. Oh yeah. This was just. It wasn't very long ago at all, it seems. It was just almost yesterday, it seems, that we were only at $9 trillion. That was a huge number then, because it is. And now we're soaring way on past that.
$20 trillion is not that far away.
I don't know. How many times have we reported on the federal government raising the debt ceiling? Now, Nick, I don't want to think that people are off on what we're reporting here, because based on some of the comments last week, people are pretty confused as to where we're coming from. We're Free Minds TV. We're challenging people to think outside the box. That means not the regular thinking that's out there. Think about something different from a different perspective. Now, thinking about that, we're not saying all or nothing here. And we're also not promoting taxes necessarily. What we are saying, though, is it's not going to make us wealthier. It's not going to make each American able to earn more if we are running up a deficit that's going to cost us down the line. I'm all about cutting taxes, but I'm sorry, you can't cut taxes while continuing to have this massive spending out there. It just doesn't work because it's going to ruin it more in the long run. It's running up a credit card bill. So yeah, I'm all about cutting taxes, but it's irresponsible, and you can't do it for any kind of sustainability without also severely reducing what's available, what services you're providing.
Yeah, I mean, what you have to look at, if you actually want to reduce taxes, to pay for it now, it would require immense cuts to government spending, which I'm for.
Right.
But what you're going to have to do is cut the federal government, not take it from 4% increases year over year to 2% increases and call those increases spending cuts, because that's what they do now. The budget actually still goes up. They just cut it back more than was projected, and that's a cut, even though the budget next year will be bigger.
Yeah, it's running over $1 trillion a year, Nick.
Right.
I mean,
so cut it by 50%. That's what you're going to have to do if you want to keep measures like the current tax rate.
But we're doing the opposite. The federal government is still growing rapidly. There's new programs opening up. They're not cutting down others. They're expanding old ones and opening up new ones. It seems irresponsible, need I say reckless, to be doing this without cutting back on services as well, because we're going to be paying for it. It's not just your grandchildren anymore that are going to be paying the price for this. When you're running up a deficit this high this quickly, it's going to be you in a few years. It's going to be seriously detrimental to the economy, not 50 years down the line. Yeah, it'll suck then, but it's going to suck in the next few years.
Actually, it might not suck in 50 years, because by then the system might have gotten so shaken up that we're not
talking about decades system down the line anymore, Nick. We're talking about
maybe a decade. I think by 2020, I mean, we're coming out of the end of this decade. This first decade of this new millennium has not been particularly kind to the United States, and that's not entirely the fault of forces acting outside of it. I think the American people have just put off dealing with this stuff.
And people have been talking about this for decades. This is 2 more years, Nick, that we're going to be putting off dealing with this.
Right. And you have entitlement programs that still haven't been fixed. Even outside the regular budget items, you still have Social Security. It hasn't been fixed. Now, it hasn't become a critical problem just yet, but wait 10 more years, and it's going to be an unsolvable problem at that point. I question whether the situation in Washington can actually be fixed anymore. I think we may have waited too long.
Well, I think I've already said many times that I believe we have. I don't think that it's even a question. I think we have waited too long already. I think it's already going to be dissolving no matter what you do, unless you're pushing the Social Security age way up. But we've seen in polls we reported on, I think it was last week, I can't remember if it was on the TV show or the radio, that Americans aren't willing to do it. They want the tax cuts, but they also want the services. I'm sorry, it doesn't work that way. Where do you think the money's going to be coming from? You think you just can print more money and suddenly everybody's wealthier? Why don't we just make the living wage $100 an hour while we're at it?
$1,000 an hour.
Everyone can be a millionaire.
If it worked that way, people would have done it. I mean, people and some people have a simplistic view of economics that actually looks at things that way, and they think that if you just made the minimum wage $100, everyone would be rich. Because you don't understand monetary policy. I'm sorry, but if that's the way you think it works, it doesn't work that way.
Here's what you do. You go take out a monopoly board. Actually take 3 monopoly boards and throw all the money and triple the money for everybody and then try to play the game. See how it works. It's not going to work very well. It's not going to be as fun.
It doesn't, yeah, right. I mean, there's more money there, and eventually it doesn't matter.
Well, the game, it's no longer...
Right. But in real life, unlike Monopoly, the rents actually go up.
Yeah.
I mean, the rents don't stay fixed. Rent, cost of living, it does go up. And we haven't seen bad inflation yet, but that is where we're headed if this is the track we stay on. And I think you're right, Toby. Americans haven't been willing to make that choice, and I can understand why. Because as long as this is allowed to go on, as long as it's feasible for the government to spend a whole bunch of money on entitlement programs and not have to pay for it through higher taxes, what's not to like? If you take the most short-sighted view of this that you possibly could, and didn't care about what's going to happen in a couple years down the line, then it seems great, doesn't it? Because we get all these free services that we're not paying for right now. But in the end, you're going to spend a lot more money paying this debt back with interest. This debt isn't just, it's not just money spent that the U.S. government doesn't have. They borrow it. What happens when you borrow money from, say, a credit card company or a bank? You pay it back with interest. If you have a mortgage and you've ever looked at your mortgage payments, even if you've got a low rate of interest a lot of what you end up paying back over 20 or 30 years, it's just interest.
Yeah,
it's just profit for the person who lent you money.
My mortgage bill out of like $1,500 a month I'm paying, I think $200 of that goes to principal. No, like $210 goes to principal.
Right.
And the rest is all interest and taxes.
That's why it's profitable, really profitable to lend money. Yeah. Especially when you lend almost $14 trillion.
So, I mean, this is seriously going to have a huge impact on all of us as we go down the lines here. I don't care what side of government you're coming on or non-government you're coming on. If you spend money, this is going to be affecting you because it's going to be taxed in some way. It's going to be taken out of your wallet some way, whether it's higher taxes, different kinds of taxes, inflation, borrowing from other countries. Some way, this affects anyone who spends money.
And we will see how these things shake out here. In the next, I would say probably 5 years, we're going to have a much better sense of where
it's a lot faster than I think a lot of analysts predicted, because as you saw inflation slowly rise,
we haven't seen big price inflation. Yeah, I mean, we've seen run-ups in things like gold and oil, I'll give you.
I'm sorry, Nick, if you're looking at what filling up a shopping cart from goods and services 10 years ago compared to now,
if you're looking at over
that's a lot of inflation.
Right.
10 years?
If you're looking at
for almost doubling inflation is pretty. That's a large amount of inflation, and that's when we have a small amount of debt. Over 10 years, we've only increased the debt by, what, $5 trillion? When you increase the debt by another $10 trillion, which this is what it's going to do in the next decade, if we're going on this same rate, it's going to...
Well, probably be, if we keep going at the same rate we've had the last couple of years, there'll be another $15 trillion before the decade's out.
And no one's going to be...
Without accelerating spending.
Anyways, it's going to definitely be affecting all of us, and it stinks. It's not that I'm saying I don't believe in tax cuts. I do. Like I said, we have to be responsible and cut back services. I also believe in going grocery shopping for my food, but I have to buy within my means. If you're someone who's putting groceries on a credit card, well, you're in trouble. Those are things you buy every day. You can't be putting that stuff on a credit card, just like we can't be putting the services we use every day on a credit card or deficit spending. Doesn't work. Yeah. Anyways, Nick, we do need to move on. Another story that's been hot in the news is WikiLeaks. We've been reporting on it. We talked extensively about it on last week's radio show, about all the stuff that's been going on.
People in Washington are very angry.
Very angry. Censoring, cutting down. Some people calling for an assassination or killing these people who have been leaking this information. These are government officials been calling for this stuff. If you want to catch all that, we talked about it on the last week's radio show, freemindsradio.com for the archives. But something interesting, something ironic popped across my computer screen this morning, and it's this. This coming from the U.S. Department of State Diplomacy in action. The United States is pleased to announce that it will host the UNESCO's World Press Freedom Day event in 2011, from May 1 to May 3 in Washington, D.C. UNESCO is a UN agency with the mandate to promote freedom of expression and freedom of the press. Let's see here. We mark such events such as World Press Freedom Day in context of our ending commitment to support and expand freedom of the press and free flow of information in a digital age. Notably contributed... persons and awards will be given to people who notably contributed to the defense and or promotion of press freedom, especially where risks have been undertaken. And it goes on from there. Wow, if that's not talking out of two ends of your mouth at once.
Right. I mean, we're saying we need to kill people who are basically acting... What WikiLeaks has done, WikiLeaks never actually directly hacked into a government database. They just received cables. This has happened before, and it's really scary if you look at the precedent they're talking about setting here. Regardless of whether you like Julian Assange or whether you like WikiLeaks or not, take a minute and think about it. Because really what he has done, he has played the role. Granted, it's a new digital age, so a lot more information gets passed a lot more quickly. But all he has done is essentially act as a newspaper editor would have, who published privileged government information that was leaked. This information was leaked. Leaks of classified information happen all the time. We don't kill reporters for reporting information they come across. That's their job. That's not what you do in the United States.
Well,
I can see there's a perfectly good legal precedent, and it makes sense to prosecute, say, U.S. military personnel who leaks this information. That's where the information came from.
Sure, he belongs to the U.S. Government. He's not supposed to be leaking that information.
Right.
He signed a contract.
And he did. He said he would.
Personally, I wouldn't want to do that, but I can see the argument being made. But, I mean, how can the U.S. say this, and how can people eat this up? How can people attend an event like this when over the last few weeks we've been hearing government officials from around the country and really around the world, UN not excluded from this, be promoting a Freedom of the Press Day to give awards to people who have helped leak information?
Well, it's probably because they were doing it about other governments.
So was the WikiLeaks.
Right, yeah, WikiLeaks does leak information out of the governments, but they also leaked it on the U.S.
Wait, so why?
You have a right to freedom of the press as long as you're not reporting on anything that embarrasses the United States government. Corruption in Kenya, police abuse in Russia. Report on those things all you want, because when another country classifies information to try to keep it out of the public eye, that's awful and tyrannical and oppressive. When the United States government does it, and a lot of the stuff that's been leaked, I can't see, it doesn't really jump out at me as anything that's all that top secret. These are policy decisions that should be made out in the open. I was reading, just one of the cables was about the Department of State's position on the drug war in Mexico, and how well the Mexican government is actually carrying out the drug war against the cartels, and how well the U.S. aid is working, or how it's not. Shouldn't the American public, the American people who pay the taxes to pay for this crap, know? I mean, this isn't clandestine. There's not a state of war between the United States and Mexico.
Well,
there's a war, basically a war going on in Mexico, but there's not a state of war between the two countries. So what national security privilege are they invoking? How we're mucking around with Mexico's own internal affairs?
Well, we've been reporting on that forever. I mean, the only thing that the release of this information did is confirm it. I mean, it's no secret. We've said that before when we've reported on this stuff. It's not a huge, grave secret. But what if it was? Isn't that what the press is for? It's the final check and balance on the government. I mean, yeah, you've got these three pillars of government, and they're supposed to check and balance each other. But the press is supposed to be you and I and all of our responsibility to make sure that the government isn't overstepping its bounds. We're supposed to be checking it. That's what this whole conference is supposed to be about. But at the same time, we're saying go after whistleblowers, go after people who are reporting on this information. We've been hearing, I can't say it enough, Nick, U.S. officials calling for the death of these people who are leaking this information, and at the same time, same department saying that we need to have this Press Freedom Day and are now hosting it in Washington, D.C. Anyways, it screams hypocrisy to me. How the American people are still lapping this up without questioning it, I don't know. But hey, I guess we're all busy people.
I don't know that they lap it up. I just don't think that they care that much. I mean, I think for the average person out there right now, a lot of people are either, well, some of you are more interested in what's going on with the NFL. Whatever, it's your life, spend it how you want. I don't think that's the best excuse. But if you're legitimately busy trying to pay your bills, raise a family, those things take up a lot of time. I can sort of understand why the average person doesn't have a whole lot of time. And to look to the American people to restrain government is, I wish it would happen, but if you look back through history, there's not a good track record of people effectively restraining their government for very long, unless you have something like a constitution in place. You need institutions that actually restrain themselves through things like a system of checks and balances. If you're just going to rely on the American people to keep an eye on their government and rely on that alone without any kind of enforceability to it, we're not going to get very far. I mean, we've seen how it's worked out over the last 10 years.
Right. Or you've seen how it's worked out for America. It hasn't worked out that well. All right, anyways, Nick, we do need to move along. Let's get into some updates here. We've got a couple of them. I do want to get into a street sign update having to do with something local here in New Hampshire. We reported on the bigger story in the past on that. We'll be getting into that story if you have questions about it. But first, we broke a story here on Free Minds TV about a teacher who was arrested for allegedly growing marijuana.
Well, we didn't technically break the Keene Sentinel broke this story.
We reported
on it here, though, shortly after the story broke.
We're not reporters, but let me rephrase. We commentated on a story that the Keene Sentinel published about a teacher who was arrested for allegedly growing marijuana. He pleaded guilty, I believe, to a lesser charge on that. And then it was up in question whether he would lose his job. The superintendent calling for him to lose his job. Of course, reading through the Sentinel in the last week, that's the local newspaper here, many letters to the editor saying this is asinine, this is stupid, this is a great teacher, people loved him. 2 days before he was arrested, people thought he was an awesome teacher. And then we find out a dark secret, and suddenly he's the devil. I think that the public support has definitely come out on this one.
I don't know how dark the secret. He was growing 2 marijuana plants in the woods.
And he was... Okay, well, we're talking... Good point, Nick, good point.
But it doesn't seem that dark.
It's a secret he probably, as a teacher, he didn't want it to come out.
It was not good for his career, but apparently it's not necessarily going to end his career. There's still one thing that's up in the air here. But the Keene Board of Education... basically, they took it to a vote. The original recommendation of the superintendent William Gurney was that the teacher in this case, Daryl Bamer, be terminated. Now, that is, the superintendent does have the power to recommend that in a case like this, where basically the grounds for dismissal in New Hampshire would have been immorality, which is one issue that school boards have the power to cite if they're going to just terminate a teacher. The board was appealed to by Mr. Bamer, the teacher, and the full board actually voted not to do this. I believe the final vote had 1 member of the board voting for termination, the others voting against. So they're going to let him return to work, pending some conditions. He's going to face 30 days suspended without pay. There's also drug testing requirements, which are actually stricter than what would be involved in a court case. So he's going to be facing, I think it was 8 drug tests a year for the next 2 years. But beyond that, I mean, the case turned out about as well as it could in this case, right, Toby? I mean, he's not losing his job. The only thing that's up in the air right now is that the felony charge against him was dropped, because even if you're only growing 2 pot plants, it's a felony charge. But as part of a plea deal, he was not convicted of a felony. But he could still lose his teaching license over a misdemeanor offense. So that's the only thing. And so he'll either take that suspended without pay if his license is suspended, and if it's suspended for long enough by the state, then the school board has said that he might lose his job because they'll replace him if staffing issues result. So that's the only thing that's still hanging up in the air. But basically, he got 2 fines that amounted to like $800 for, I think it was a trespass charge and a growing marijuana charge. And those were suspended. So if he's not convicted of anything else, he's not even going to pay any fine. He does have some drug testing requirements and stuff he has to face, but I'm actually surprised that the board made this decision, but I'm glad that they made this decision.
It is good news, so tip of the hat to the board, but I mean, still wagging the finger, for Colbert phrase there, at the superintendent and everybody who supports policy like this in general. How many people who are supporting this teacher even go through all this stuff aren't going home and having a drink tonight or on the weekend or at some point in time? Mr. Superintendent, telling me you've never imbibed in the spirits? I don't believe you.
I mean, I think for the school board,
yes,
I think
absolutely.
I think on their part, what they're basically dealing with is there was one comment. I think it was actually Chris Coates made the comment that, you know, views on whether marijuana should be illegal or not, they weren't being factored in the school board's decision, because basically they're dealing with just a law was broken. We've got this school board policy.
We are robots. We have to go by what's on paper.
It's it's the way it works. But
that's bureaucracy.
But they did come through all the bureaucracy. They came to a pretty
good for them.
Conclusion.
I gotta say, I am surprised. I didn't think it would go this way.
One of the few times we agree with anything.
I thought they were going to crucify this man. Anyways, Nick, we do need to move along. We've got this last story I want to talk about here. We've been talking about it for a while here. It's now starting to break out and seep into local media outlets. We talked a while back. We've reported on a couple of different times. Not reported, commentated. We're not reporters. I keep on trying to fix
people don't like it. People get confused because we say reported, but obviously we've got an axe to grind. So
we're
not
reporters.
Journalism.
We're commentators here, folks. We definitely are coming from a certain viewpoint or many viewpoints, and we're not reporting.
We're about as objective as
Fox News.
Fox News, Bill Maher, Rush Limbaugh, those guys. The guys you think of that have a serious axe to grind.
Right.
We don't even pretend.
We're not
objective.
We're not necessarily aligned with any of them, but we definitely have our own agenda. Anyways, did want to talk about this. The federal government, the Department of Transportation, has this whole 800-plus recommendation book for what street signs and street lights have to be looking like. down the road as time goes on. I don't know when that all has to be done. I haven't combed through the report. Some people say that there's mandated dates, some don't. It depends on which news articles you're looking at, so I'm not going to say that. But what I am going to say is this, real quick to wrap up. What's been going on is the DOT says all street signs can no longer be in caps. They must be in caps plus lowercase because of two reasons. First story we report on, yes, this is the federal government said, all uppercase is yelling, at least over the internet. That was a federal document that came out saying that, as well as one saying that old people, people with bad eyes can't read uppercase letters as well, so replacing them with lowercase letters makes them easier to read. Who can't read street signs out there? I don't know if you should be behind a wheel, but that's just me. But what I wanted to note here is that more and more news stories that I'm seeing on local websites, local governments are balking at this idea because it's something that will cost billions upon billions upon billions of dollars, and of course it's an unfunded mandate from the federal government saying that you just need to replace your street signs. This coming from WMUR, where Hampton, a resident, actually it's the Hampton town manager, says, quote, "My reaction is that it's just crazy. It's just nuts," said Hampton town manager Fred Welch. "There's no way anyone with a rational mind would think up something like this."
Well,
you couldn't put it better, my friend.
Well, it's no one with a rational mind did think it up. You had probably a team of bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. who write up these rules. They don't have to follow this. They're not going to put up the signs themselves. So that sounds like a good idea.
Well, it also sounds like a very lucrative idea. I mean, I was reading through the comments. One of them that I liked is, if you don't know where you're going, stay home. You know, no street signs.
I think we should have granite curbing on every mile of interstate in the United States. That sounds like a good idea.
Yeah, what was
granite curbing?
What was another one? It was, I don't know, the good comments up there. Anyways, we are out of time. I'm being given the signal in the booth that it's time for us to move on. Log on to freemindsmedia.org. Until next week, it's been Toby here with you.
And Nick.
Have an excellent evening and safe travels and all that good stuff. Are we over? Yeah.
为什么强大的国家都会走向灭亡呢？古希腊、罗马帝国、不列颠帝国、美国，因为他们都犯同样的错误，与原来使得他们成功的原则背道而驰。美国政府企图以庞大的开支和税收来摆脱严重的经济衰退，巨额的所谓刺激开支。 庞大的医疗改革，政府接管私有企业，债务累累。当然，我们是他们的大债主。现在他们都得给我们干活。
You can change the future. You have to. Join Citizens Against Government Waste to stop the spending that is bankrupting America.